that we find in many different traditions. And dualistic traditions, of course, it'll be kind of a ladder to heaven, something like that. In a non-dualistic tradition, this will be more symbolic, just that path from ignorance to knowledge, or from our ordinary condition to realization, something like that. So it's this type of symbolism that Sri Ramakrishna likes very much. We find it in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. There's an image of the ladder. Sometimes it's steps or a stairway, and sometimes it's climbing up to the roof. Sometimes it's getting to the even top of a wall. Sometimes it's jumping over to the other side. Sometimes we take the help of a bamboo pole or a rope, other things. But we have this image of spiritual life somehow starting at the ground level and working our way progressively higher and higher and higher until we reach the final rung of the ladder, and that will get us to the very top of the roof. So this is that imagery. And when we go through the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, we see that he utilized this image in many different ways. And some of them more suitable to the path of devotion, some to the path of jnana, some to yoga, so all different things. And I'm going to briefly mention some of the different ways in which the steps have some symbolic meaning, and then I'll go through it in a little detail. And yeah, if you want to make little notes to yourself whenever there's anything that needs some clarification or something, we'll come back to it at the end. So we can see this journey, because we're looking at spiritual life as a journey, not from point A to point B, but from ground level to the roof. And we see that one of the things that this symbolizes is what we can call this purification process. And this purification process can be seen in terms of the three gunas. And Sri Ramakrishna uses this imagery also, that the initial bottom rungs will be different stages of tamas, and then we go through rajas, we get the sattva. Final rung will be the shuddha sattva, this pure sattva. And then after that, we reach the roof. So this is one way that we see this image, this gradual transformation of our nature, purification, ridding ourselves of these tamasic and rajasic tendencies and developing sattva. So this, of course, is paramount in spiritual life, to purify the heart, purify the mind, so that we can assimilate these higher spiritual ideals, and we can have some higher type of realization. So this is number one. Then we can see the steps in terms of two different tiers, two different stages. And this is what Sri Ramakrishna calls the Vedanta Bhakti and Anuraga. Well, Raga, Anuraga, he has different names for it, but the first set of steps, which will also correspond more or less to transcending tamas and rajas, these will be the preliminary types of spiritual practices. And then when we get higher and higher, we get to the sattva, we enter into a completely different realm, where we don't have to be so particular about following a routine, and we reach that point where everything is more or less spontaneous, and we get pulled up the rest of the way. So we have this illustration. Then sometimes the ladder image is used to signify the journey, and this will be more for the jnani, from what Thakur calls nitya to the lila. Nitya, we understand to mean or from lila to nitya, lila, this divine play. Sri Ramakrishna uses it in the sense of the relative plane. And from this, going through this relative plane, we reach the nitya, which will be the absolute plane. So here, the entire ladder will be on this lila plane. And then when we finally get to the roof, that will take us to the nitya. And this going back and forth, this is what the Vijnani can do. He can go back from the roof and come back down again. but he won't go below the sattvic level. So this is one way of looking at it. Then Thakur talks about climbing this ladder in terms of two things, anuloma and viloma, which he describes as negation and affirmation. Anuloma, you know, if you look at the hairs on the arm, you'll see that they go in one direction. That's anuloma. And then if you go reverse it, it goes in the other direction, viloma. So that means that we have one process to get to the roof, then we reverse our steps to come back down. I'll go through all of these things in more detail afterwards. So this will be on the different stages, and it corresponds to negation and affirmation. This is another thing where we practice this neti, and we try to realize the nature of the self, which is different from everything else. And then when we come back down again, we see that what we denied as belonging to asat is really the manifestation of Brahman. So that will be the stage of vijnana. Okay, then we have various teachings about the nature of the roof and different methods of reaching it. As I said before, Thakur says some people will use a bamboo pole, some will use a rope, some will use the stairs, some will use the ladder. There are all different means and methods. This means that there are all different spiritual paths, devotional and philosophical and meditational, all different ways of getting there. Then we'll get to this question of, can we really reach the roof? Can we just get up there and peep over? Can we climb up to the roof? Can we take a short stroll and come back down? How long can we stay there? Do we get pulled over? We find out that the roof is really a wall, and we jump over to the other side. Who can stay there? Who can go back and forth? We'll discuss these things. Sri Ramakrishna talks about this quite often in terms of the distinction between the avatar and the Ishvarakoti and the Jivakoti. So we'll get to these things. So that's a basic summary of what we're going to go through in a little more detail. And it's a big topic. So of course we won't be able to do everything in a very exhaustive way, but we'll try to go through these things and get a general idea, because the metaphors are helpful. They're very helpful to give us something concrete and tangible to hold on to when we're trying to deal with these abstract concepts. So this ladder or steps or stairs, however we look upon it, this is symbolic of the spiritual journey. As I say, we're not going from point A to point B. We're making some ascent. Sometimes we think of it as climbing up a mountain to get to the top of the mountain. So this signifies that we will go through different stages in our spiritual life. And we find that we have all different lessons that we have to learn. Some things are very painful. Sometimes we feel that we're sliding back and we're not making progress. But actually everything is progress. Everything is progress because we're learning from everything, and there are things that we have to go through. Sometimes we don't realize until much later that this was very important and very helpful for us in our spiritual life. So it's if we think of climbing a mountain, sometimes we have to actually go to a lower elevation, and at the same time we're closer to the top. We're going around this way. We can't go straight up, so we take a path that goes around. Sometimes it'll dip down. We think that, oh, we were closer to the top of the mountain when we first started. But actually, in terms of time and distance, we're closer to the top, even though the elevation is greater. So we have to go through all of these things. Wherever we start, there's no shortcut. We can't skip any rungs. Thakur gives a nice illustration. You know, we have different types of board games, like Monopoly, other things where you have a piece, and it has to go all the way around the board till it gets to the end. And usually the end is where we begin. But Thakur says that you have to go through each and every square. So in spiritual life, there's nothing like go directly to go collect $200, stay out of jail. We have to go through all of these things. Maybe we've done some earlier, but we have to go through all of these things. So that means we can't jump to the roof in a single bound. whatever rung we're on, we have to go to the next one and the next one and the next one. Some will be easy, some will be hard, some will take longer, some will seem to be very quick. Sometimes we may think we're higher than we are. Sometimes we may actually be higher than we think that we are. So this is also a way of giving us some type of marker in spiritual life. Everyone is interested. We always ask this question, how do we know if we're making progress? How do we know how close we are? How close we are to getting to the roof, to realizing this. But we have a little bit of a way of doing it if we think in terms of the gunas. We see how much sattva we're developing. We see how much freedom we have from anger and envy and lust and greed and pride and all of the different passions and everything. So it's very helpful from that point of view. We shouldn't be overly obsessed with this idea of progress, always asking, oh, how close am I? We keep our head down and we keep moving ahead, that's all. But it is helpful sometimes to be able to look back and say, yes, I used to get angry so easily. Now these things don't bother me so much. These are signs of progress. It means that we've climbed a few rungs, that we're not still stuck in this tamas and rajas. Okay, so let's start with the three gunas. We'll look upon this ladder, say that this ladder has 8 rungs, something like that. Ground level will be this deep tamas. So there'll be people who are sunk in tamas, that they'll never care for the ladder, they'll never look for it, or if they find it, they won't be interested in it. They have no enthusiasm for anything in spiritual life or in secular life or in anything. Then a little bit of rajas has to enter into this tamas. So that means a little feeling of, oh, let me do something. And this is what Swamiji was trying to instill into many of the young people in India. You know, Swamiji had this theory that through centuries of foreign domination, that people had lost their will to do anything. And tamas was prevalent, disguised as sattva. So people felt that, no, we're too good and calm and peaceful and mild and everything to get angry and do this and that. Swamiji didn't like that. He said, it's not really sattva, it's tamas. So this is why in India, Swamiji was constantly saying, arise, awake. And we have so many nice stories that Swamiji was talking to a young man one day, and the young man, Swamiji could see that he had no inner stuff, that no enthusiasm to do anything. So Swamiji, in course of conversation, asked him, can you tell a lie? And he said, oh, Swamiji, no, I could never tell a lie. And he said, then first learn to tell a lie. That means at least do something. Not that he wanted him to lie, but that he wanted him to know that at least exert yourself, that some type of self-expression, something to get rid of this terrible tamas. And then we know that he told some boys they wanted to know about the meaning of Gita. He said, you play your football, you'll understand Gita better through this playing football. That means be active, do something. So rajas is necessary to overcome tamas. And then we'll get to that rung. So now we have this rung, the rajas, which is influenced by tamas. We want to eliminate that tamasic aspect. And then we want to get to the rung where rajas is influenced by sattva. So that means that now we see that all this energy that I've been putting forth in secular life, worldly life, I can direct this to spiritual life. And if I can have this concentration and dedication to my work, I can have the same thing for spiritual attainment. So this is a very good stage when this rajas is combined with sattva. We never find these gunas that don't have a little bit of additional, either some combination of two or all three of the gunas. Then we get the sattva, which is influenced by rajas. This is the state, this is what we're looking for. That means that now we have tremendous determination and we want to be very active in our spiritual life, do whatever we can to have this higher type of realization. So this is what we're aiming for. Then when this rajas leaves, what happens when we get to pure sattva? We become unable to do any type of spiritual practice on our own, because everything now has become spontaneous. This is reaching that anuraga state. And this is what we can say is almost like a second tier. You know, sometimes we're climbing to the steps and we see the roof. We get there and we find that it's a false roof. That we have to go and we find there's another ladder. So we get there and we find there's other ladder. This will be pure sattva, and we won't have to climb it. There'll actually be somebody at the top reaching down with the hand, Divine Mother, whatever, and will pull us up the rest of the way. So this is that two-tier theory, that we go a certain distance and we think that we've reached the goal, but we've reached the plateau area. And then there's something higher, and it takes it. We have a different technique for that. Swami Vivekananda, you know, Holy Mother's disciple. He was head of the New York Center for many, many years. I heard from one of his disciples that he used to tell people, the light you see is at the beginning of the tunnel. You all know the expression that the light at the end of the tunnel. He said, no, the light you see is the beginning of the tunnel. Now, what does that mean? So we're in a dark tunnel and we see light in the distance. And we think that if we can walk towards the light, then we'll exit the tunnel. But we walk and walk and walk, and we see that the light is coming from a different angle. And we have to make a right-hand turn, and then we see that it's wide open for us. So that beginning of the tunnel is the second stage, and it's very short and very easy and very natural. It automatically happens. This is what Thakur says is like this arunodaya, he says. When we see the orange color in the sky in the early morning, and we know that within a very short period, the sun will come up. The rest of spiritual life, we have no idea. The middle of the night, it's dark out. We don't know if it's 1 o'clock in the morning or if it's 5 o'clock in the morning. If we have to wait another few minutes or if we have to wait several hours, we have no idea. But as soon as we see the light, then we know we're very close to the end. So the second stage, when we get to pure sattva, this will be sharanagati. This will be taking refuge in God. This will be renunciation, absolute reliance, surrender, all of these different things. We get this very clearly stated in chapter 6 in the Gita. There's one very nice verse, this ararukshu. Ararukshu is somebody who's trying to climb up. So someone who's trying to reach is ararukshu munir yogam. So somebody who wants to attain the state of yoga. All right, now we may assume that attaining the state of yoga means God realization. But it says someone who wants to do that, karma karanam uchyate. Then the means to attain that state of yoga will be action. We have to work hard. We have to do our sadhana, do our meditation, our japa, our prayer, our puja, all of those things. But then it says, yoga rudhasya, for someone who has attained that state. Now, if we have attained that state and that's the final goal, there will be nothing else to do. But it doesn't say that. It says, tasya eva, for that person, shama karanamuchyate. Then we have another means that we adopt, and that is shama. That means quietude. That means we don't have to put forth that same type of effort we had before. So Thakur gives so many illustrations that the daughter-in-law in the mother-in-law's home, she's pregnant, and as soon as she starts showing, then it's difficult for her to get around, then the mother-in-law reduces her activities and her duties. Then each month, as she gets closer to the delivery date, her duties become fewer and fewer. And then the very final month, she has nothing to do. And then she gives a birth to the baby. And after that, all she does is look after the baby for some time. Now, the important thing here is that At no time does the daughter-in-law herself decide, oh, now I'll give up all duties. The mother-in-law decides. So some people ask, well, how do we know when we've attained this state of anuraga? How do we know when we can, have I reached the point where I don't have to do my japa every day? I don't have to wake up early every morning. It'll happen to us automatically. We don't decide. It'll just happen. The Divine Mother will relieve us of all those duties. It means that the mind is spontaneously thinking of God all of the time. Not that we can just eliminate that time of meditation. The mind will naturally be meditating the whole time. So this is one illustration. Then the bird on the mast of the ship. This is all to explain these two different tiers. We all know the story. The bird falls asleep on the mast of the ship that was docked at the pier. And while the bird is sleeping, the ship goes out to sea. And by the time the bird wakes up, the ship is so far out to sea that the bird doesn't know what direction the land is in. So the bird decides, let me try one way. So the bird flies east as far as it can, and then it realizes that it better fly back, otherwise he'll get so tired that he'll drown in the ocean. So it goes back and rests, does the same thing to the west, the north, and the south, until it's completely exhausted. And then it says, now nothing to do but take shelter, refuge with the ship. Wherever the ship goes, I'll go, I'll be perfectly content. I've done my best, I tried my best. So this first, karma muchyate, we have to flap our wings, not just to tire ourselves out, but this doing that leads to tremendous transformation. And we can't, if the bird in the beginning had said, wherever the boat takes me, it'll take me, that doubt would have been there. All I had to do was fly in this direction, I could have found land. So it's necessary to do all of that. So we have that illustration. And then of course the boatman. This is a very, very common one. How hard the boatman has to work, big heavy boat, to get it from the land into the water, and then to row until it gets far enough out, and then to raise the sail. It's a big job. It takes a lot of work. But once the sails are up and everything is tied down, and if there's a favorable breeze, anukul hawa, Thakur uses this term, I like this term very much, anukul hawa, this favorable breeze. That means sometimes, if you know anything about sailboating, if the breeze is coming from the side, you have to go back and forth. You tack back and forth. If the breeze is behind you, then it's full sail ahead. That all the sails go straight up and you don't even have to steer. So the boatman will just sit back and not do anything. So this is what Thakur says, that breeze of grace, anukula hawa. So that will be the second stage. So that really we don't have to worry about climbing up the remaining stairs. We'll be pulled up. It'll happen automatically to us. We actually see with the Gita, this is really the whole theme of this Gita. We think to ourselves that main teaching is performance of duty, dharma. Through performance of duty, that we can have the highest realization. Everything is dharma. That constantly Sri Krishna is beating that into the head of Arjuna. You have to do your dharma. Then we get to the very end, and what does he say? You give up all of this idea of dharma. Sarva dharma parityajya, and take refuge with me alone. Mamekam sharanam vraja. I'll take care of the rest. You don't have to worry about anything. I'll take care of everything else. So what my feeling is, what Sri Krishna is actually doing is he's telling Arjuna that this will happen in the future. Now you have to do your duty, your dharma and everything, but there will come a time when you'll feel that I've had enough of this. And at that time, I'll take all of your responsibility. So this again, we can say final teachings that there will come a time when even this idea of dharma and duty impinges on our sense of freedom. Swamiji says that this idea of duty, it's like the burning noonday sun, that we have obligation to do something. I want to be free, I want to be free. But we can't do that This is that same thing. We can't jump over the rungs of the ladder. We have to go through it. We have to do it through performance of duty, and that'll take us to the stage behind it. Okay, now, what does the final rung of the ladder look like? Huh? When we get to this pure sattva, or we get to that final stage of shama or sharanagati and everything, here, this will be our first indication that there are many different ladders and the rungs will not be the same. Even though we may say tamas rajas sattva, this final rung may be very, very different. For some, the shama may be the very, very end that we're practically sthita prajnas with perfect calmness and perfect same-sightedness, perfect freedom from ego and pride and anger and all of that, and a very simple transition to get to the roof. This is one thing. Then we see the exact opposite, and these are both can be on the path of devotion. What was the final rung for Sri Ramakrishna? Vakuluta, tremendous anguish of heart, tremendous restlessness. He couldn't sleep, he couldn't take food, he would be weeping day and night, he would be rolling on the ground, ready to cut his throat. So that final rung may be different. We'll see different personality types, different spiritual paths. It may look different, but it will lead to the roof. All of these different methods, and that roof is the same. There's only one roof. If we get to that state, and Thakur says every spiritual path ends in oneness. So we all get to the roof. That's when our individuality melts away and we have that experience. But before that, it'll depend very much on our spiritual attitude and the spiritual path that we follow. So we see this path of devotion in general, the importance of grace, that the closer we get to the top, the less we have this feeling of agency, the less we have this feeling or this desire to do intense spiritual practice, that we start to feel ourselves being pulled. And Thakur says that this is like walking close enough to this magnetic mountain. We have to walk from a great distance, perhaps, but the closer we get, the less effort, because it starts to pull us in. So this is, as I say, this is the meaning of grace, that self-effort at the beginning, purushakara, and then sharanagati. Then we practice this taking refuge in God. So different classes, different types, different personalities. It may be a very smooth, easy thing, and for others, it's the state of divine madness. This is why Thakur says, even for the God-realized soul, how many different spiritual types we have. This Tita Prajna is only one type from Gita, that Thakur says, Unmalavat. Some will appear like madmen. Then we have Pishachavat. Some will appear like ghouls. Then we have Jadavat. They'll be like inert things, always lost in meditation. Balakavat. They'll be like children. There's no attachment to anything, just having fun and enjoying everything. So all different ways of living in the world after having this God realization, depending on the type of ladder that we take. That means the spiritual path and our own spiritual attitude and our own personality also. So we have ladders, as I mentioned before, that will be for different yogas also. So for Jnana Yoga, there'll be a different ladder. Bhakti Yoga, there'll be a different ladder. And Raja Yoga also. What we've seen so far is mostly the path of devotion. Two different types of devotees perhaps, but the path of devotion. So let's look a little bit at this path of knowledge, okay? So we saw in the beginning that for the Jnani we have two concepts. One is this Lila Nitya, and the other was this Anuloma and Viloma. So this Nitya, Lila and Nitya, this will be the looking at this climb from the path from for the vision of duality, from a dualistic way of seeing things to this Advaitic knowledge, to oneness. So what do we do on this path? This path of neti neti. Now, Sri Ramakrishna, he has a unique way of expressing this, and he comes up with statements that seem to contradict directly the traditional teachings of Advaita Vedanta with regard to what is real and what is unreal. We have this Jagat Mithya. This is a very, very controversial phrase. It can be taken in so many different ways, but in general, we can say that this world is unreal. And Shankaracharya, of course, he's a non-dualist, but in terms of spiritual practice, in terms of vichara, vichara marga, everything is in terms of dualism. What are the two dualistic categories? Sat and asat, the real and the unreal, the seer and the seen, Durik Drishya Viveka. Durik Drishya Viveka, we always identify this with the highest type of Advaitic knowledge, but it's based on a dualistic view of things where we separate everything into two categories. One is the seer and the other is the seen. And the seen the physical body, we can observe it. The senses, we can observe the mind or thoughts or emotions, everything we can observe. That means we're something separate from it. If we say Brahman is the one thing that is uncaused, one thing is not composed of parts, one thing that doesn't change, one thing that is constant, then we eliminate everything in the external world. We say all of that is asat, and Brahman is whatever is left will be sat. So this is a dualistic way of looking at it to get to the roof. Once we get to the roof, we've cast aside everything that is asat. Whatever we say is unreal, we've cast it aside. Now, the Jnani will say ultimately that, no, it's not really dualistic, because what we're doing is we're showing that if it's asat, it means it doesn't have any existence. It's an empty category. We only thought that there was something which we can say asat, but by definition, we say darkness. There are two things, light and darkness. Then when we get to the light, we realize, no, there's only light, but it can be obstructed and then it looks like darkness. In the beginning, we'll want to distinguish. We have light and dark. Otherwise, we'll get to that point, we'll see that everything else had no ultimate reality. So we see that Maya had no ultimate reality. But when we're doing it with this lila and this neti, we're doing it with this idea that this world is unreal. Now, what Sri Ramakrishna says, he was asked one time, is the world then unreal? And he gave a very curious answer. He said, as long as one has not realized God, the world is unreal. Now, for Shankaracharya, we would expect him to say that in this state of ignorance, we take this world to be real, but it is really unreal. Thakur is saying that because we don't know that we're not really looking at a snake, we're looking at the rope. Because we don't know that this is really Brahman that we're seeing, that we take it to be unreal. After God realization, and we see this world, we'll know that it's real because it's nothing but Brahman. So Shankaracharya will say, after God realization, then we see Jagat Mithya, this world is unreal. Before that, we take it as something real. They're just looking at it from two different directions. There's no real contradiction. Only for Sri Ramakrishna, the Vijnani, the one who has that experience and comes down, that he'll have that vision that everything is Chinmaya, everything is the manifestation of the divine. This is why, even in the Upanishads, we'll have some verses that will say that this visible universe is nothing but name and form. We get rid of this name and form because they're unreal. They're Maya. The only reality is Brahman. And at the same time, it'll say that Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma, that everything we say, this visible universe, is nothing but Brahman. So it just depends how we look at it. If we're looking at an object, If we think it's a snake, then we're mistaken, but we're actually seeing something. We're actually seeing something. We just don't know what we're seeing. He wrote. So this will take us to the state of jnana. Now, this is another distinction that Sri Ramakrishna will make, that we have the state of ajnana, in ignorance, and when we climb to the roof, we realize oneness. We realize that everything that we saw and thought was real, everything we identified with, this ego sense and all of that, we see that that wasn't our real sense of I. We merge in this highest type of reality. That state of jnana up on the roof, this world disappears for us. It disappears for us. Now, Sri Ramakrishna says that there's a state beyond the jnana when we come down from that, after that realization, and we live in the world, the mind comes down to a slightly lower level, and then we see everything as divine. Now, the devotee also can come down and be in that vijnana state. The devotee, Thakur says, the devotee sees everything as a manifestation of the Divine Mother, and will live with a relationship with Mother, or servant-master relationship, something like that. The jnani, he says, Shankaracharya kept his ego of knowledge. He'll live in a world where everything is hazy and dreamlike. The self is the one shining reality that he's identified with. Okay, so we have the vijnana state, and this is where Sri Ramakrishna talks about this ripe ego. You know, this is also this going from the bottom rung to the top rung. We can look at it in terms of starting with the green ego, unripe ego, and getting to that ripe ego. But after we come down, then we have a different transformed type of ego. So we live in the world that way. Okay, so this is more or less, we can say, this path of jnana yoga. And for Sri Ramakrishna, after coming down from that, so the jnani can say this world is unreal, Brahman alone is real. The big jnani will say everything is real. Swami Turiyananda, on his deathbed, was supposed to have said, Brahma Satyam, Jagat Satyam. Brahman is real, the world is also real. Okay, now we'll get to the ladder of the yogi. And of course, there's a lot of overlap. The path of knowledge and the path of meditation are usually very highly compatible. People follow them together and everything, so there'll be many similarities. We can think of the ladder in terms of Kundalini, rising up, that the Muladhara will be the lowest rung, we go up all of them, Sahasrara will be the roof. We can think of it in those terms. We can think of it in terms of Ashtanga Yoga, the different limbs. That way will be the different rungs. We finally get to Samadhi. This will be at the very top. And then we see along this path that getting to the roof and staying on the roof. Suppose we climb up and we leave that final rung of the ladder and we actually get to the roof. So it's not that we're on the ladder and we've reached the roof and we're looking over and we see everything there. We've left the ladder behind us. And God knows, for some people, the ladder may even fall and there's no coming back down. But now we have this, what I think is kind of a knotty problem, an interesting question. I struggled with this for many, many years. Of course, still haven't reached any very, very definite conclusions, but it's an interesting question. I've read so many different things about it that it's starting to get clarified in my mind. Who can stay up on the roof following this path of yoga? Now, because Thakur says that for Jivakoti, and we'll get to these different distinctions, that means an ordinary person, not ordinary in the sense of worldly person, but someone other than an avatar, or what he calls an Ishvarakoti. So for ordinary jiva who has attained through spiritual practice or great, whatever, to this state where they can enter into that nirvikalpa samadhi, that they won't be able to bring the mind back down from that state. That because there's no I left. There's no one there who can do it. Huh? So that whatever Jivatma there is gets merged in this Paramatman, and the body will last for 21 days, then fall off. So this is what he says about the Jivakoti. Then the Ishvarakoti, they can go and they can have this experience of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. How long can they stay there? How deeply can it be? Can they come back from that easily? These are all very interesting questions. But let's go back to the Jivakoti. Now, if we feel that in this path of meditation, that the only way to attain liberation is to get to Nirvikalpa Samadhi, then does it mean that that's the end of our life? So Thakur says that, well, there'll be instances where one can enter into the highest state of Samadhi, but there'll be some karma. There'll be a little bit of desire there that'll pull the mind down. So something external will pull the mind down a little bit. He says, like the mongoose, these village boys the mongoose will be in its little hole in the wall, and they'll tie a brick to it and it'll fall down and it'll try to climb back up, and the weight of the brick will pull it down. And then he says, he makes many different statements. Sometimes there'll be people who have a little desire to work for the welfare of others. That desire, good desire, can bring the mind back down a little bit. He tells the story of the four friends, and they're walking along the road, and there's a high wall, the type of barrier wall, not with a roof or anything like that. But they hear a very joyful sound, singing, dancing, and music and everything. And one by one, they're curious, and they climb up to the top. And the first three friends, they look over, and they're helpless. So enchanting that they can't help themselves. They say, ha, and jump over. And then the fourth one goes up and feels that same pull to jump over. But says, no, let me go back and tell other people about this tremendous joy on the other side of the wall. So these types of souls also can come back down. Now, can it be that there are different levels of Samadhi? We know Savikalpa Samadhi, of course, but even Nirvikalpa Samadhi, are there different levels of that? And is it possible that one can go and enter into that state for a short period of time and come back down? Yeah, why not? Even Sri Ramakrishna, sometimes we read he went into a very deep state of Samadhi. It took a long time before the mind came down. If we're very strictly philosophical, we would say that, well, there's no vritti, there's no vritti. How can there be any tadatamya? How can there be any gradation in Nirvikalpa Samadhi? But if we're practical people, we know that there is. Take the state of dreamless sleep. We may say dreamless sleep, you're not dreaming and you're not awake, you're sleeping. But we know that there are deeper states of sleep. There's sometimes that little children can be asleep, so deeply asleep, you can shake them, they won't wake up. And then there'll be old people like us, the slightest little thing, we wake up. So even with this Nirvikalpa Samadhi, I'll read something in a little bit about this that I found very interesting. Other thing is that there's Ishvarakoti. Now we have these categories. There's avatar. Now there's avatar is way up there. Now the Ishvarakoti, the avatar, and we don't have to say, take a Puranic view, God decided to be born as a human being, anything like that. It can be just this huge tidal wave of a jiva who is born without any past karma and has tremendous power, tsunami. This we can say is the avatar. Then who are the Ishvarakotis? Well, they're supposed to come along with the avatar, but if we look at it from the other point of view, these will be small versions of the avatar. That means that they also weren't born in order to achieve their own liberation. They were also nityasiddha, all for perfect souls, who have a great capacity for spiritual practice and spiritual power and spiritual attainment. Now, who are the Jivakotis? Everybody else. Now, as I say, we can look at these as three different boxes, or we can look at it as a continuum. I like this continuum idea that from one point of view, the Jivacotis also cannot stay in this Nirvikalpa Samadhi very long. That they'll also get stuck there. And there's a big difference between even the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. Now, Sri Ramakrishna had this theory, something that he called Adhar. So he was a Bordo Adhar. Adhar is a container, is a receptacle. And he would give the illustration, you know, in his room in Dakshineshwar, in the northwestern corner, is a huge cistern, jala, they call it. It could contain a huge amount of water. He could use it for bathing if it was his health wasn't good, he didn't want to go out, something like that. So he would talk about Swamiji, the Naren, that he's a huge container. Or he would give the example of different types of fish. There's something called Lao Chokurui. There's red-eyed carp, huge fish. So he would say Swami's like a huge container, Narendra. Others maybe like pitchers and things like that. So there is a gradation, even among the direct disciples, even among the Jivacotis. And Swamiji had that, of course, experience in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Swamiji, Swami Brahmananda, we don't know what exactly it means, who had Savikalpa Samadhi, Nirvikalpa Samadhi, very difficult to understand all of these things. Now, because I read this not too long ago, and I found it so interesting that this is a book called Pratin Sadhudev Kotha. This is reminiscences and writings and sayings and things all about the very senior monks of our order, and many of them who had direct contact with the direct disciples. Swami Chaitanandaji wrote this book. From the time he had first joined, he would always go to these old monks and ask them questions. And if they had a diary, can I see your diary? Can I make copies of it? So he put out this wonderful book. It's in 2 different volumes, and it's in Bengali. So I'll try to just give a very rough translation. This is Swami Saradananda, that I forget who it was. Swami Asheshanandaji. Swami Asheshanandaji from Portland was his disciple and lived with him in Udbodhan when Holy Mother was there. So he had tremendous scope to ask him questions, and he would record conversations. So this was one of the conversations that Swami Sharananda says that there are different stages and degrees with regard to going into Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Okay, we don't read these things very much. Different stages and degrees. Purnagani Paristila, if one is established in full, perfect knowledge and becomes completely identified, then he says that the Jiva or the Jivacotis cannot come back. So now if we want to see this division, he's putting Jivacotis and Jivacotis in the same category. So he says, Keval Avatar, only the Avatar can come back. This is how Sri Ramakrishna, none of the others could have stayed. He stayed 6 months, more or less, in that state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. The others, if they get fully and deeply merged in it, this means even Swamiji, that he was only, how long was he in Kashipur? How long was he in that state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi? We don't know, 15 minutes, half hour, not long. Then after that, he went out to Sri Ramakrishna and everything. And even that, he didn't know what was happening. Where's my body? What happened to me? All of this. So tremendous distinction between the Avatar and the Jivacotis. So here he's saying both. The Jiva or Jivakoti, Jivacotis, not possible for them to return from that state. Only the Avatar. Then he says, reason dieta explain korajaina. We can't explain these things. Logically, we can't explain these things. And then he says that one can temporarily come back from this Advaitic stage, Advaitic Bhumiteki, to return from that means to enter into this Savikalpa state. And he goes on and on. Then he's asked, can a jiva ever become an Ishvarakoti? And so what do you think? Can a jiva become an Ishvarakoti? And a Nitya Siddha. We say Nitya Siddha, does that mean someone who was always perfect? How do they even take that first birth? So these are all things that he was very sharp in his understanding of things. So he says, in the previous births, whether he was bound or not, tini bodho chilen ki na, e bishoy nishchoy kore bole jay. We can't say with certainty. It's nice to hear people leave things wide open a little bit. And then he says, is it possible for a small container through its own power to become a huge container? Jala again. And as if to say it's not possible. Then he says, but Thakur Amader Bolechan, Thakur has told us, if it's the will of God, that also can happen. So there's a lot of scope for our understanding. We shouldn't think that, and Thakur says so many times, live in the world, realize God, then live in the world. We shouldn't think that, what is he telling us? That you realize God and we'll be gone in 21 days. Not everyone realizes God only through Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Even the devotee, through love of God, can have that highest realization and live in the world. So let me just point to one final illustration, which shows the ambivalence, Thakur's ambivalence. I won't really call it ambivalence. I'll go back to this theory of Adhar, that it's not that he can say, well, definitely this Ishvarakoti can do this, Avatar can do this, Jivakoti can do this, because there's a big gradation among all of them. One day, Sri Ramakrishna was talking about the question of returning from the state of Samadhi. So this is the big question, who can come back? When the sense of I completely vanishes, there's no means by which one can pull the mind back down. So then one devotee asked, then what about Shukadeva? Okay, we're going on the assumption that Shukadeva had the highest possible realization and yet lived in the world. So he's saying that Thakur, you're saying that one has Nirvikalpa Samadhi and one's mind is completely merged in Brahman. There's no coming back. Like the salt dal. If the salt dal really melts, by the time it gets to the bottom of the ocean, then it's impossible for it to come back. Thakur, the other illustration is Thakur himself went to the bottom of the ocean and came back, but wasn't able to say anything about it. He could recreate himself back into the dal. He was merged in the ocean at that time, but could come back. Anyhow, Thakur replied, very interesting conclusion. Some say, so now he'll give us options. Some say Shukadeva saw the ocean of the absolute Brahman and touched its waters, but did not go into the water. Therefore, he was able to come back and teach mankind. Others believe that he attained to the absolute Brahman and then returned to help humanity. So we can't say much. I went into all of this in a little detail, just because it interests me. We don't have to bother about it. This is the last thing we have to worry about when we come back from Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the very last thing. We have so many things in the world to worry about that we don't have to worry about that. There's so many types of spiritual experiences and realization that we can have far short of this Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Nirvikalpa Samadhi is really the way God realized soul will leave the world. These jnanis, they'll go enter into that state and then give up the body. It's not something that is going to happen very easily to all of us. So what we should focus on is the ladder itself. We want the right ladder for us, the one that is good for us, and we have to stick to it, and we have to persevere. And if we can have a ladder that blends all of the four yogas, that this is the best possible type. And we have to understand that everyone has a different ladder. We have to see that all ladder, when Thakur says, that he means that all ladders are going to the roof. And we have to have sympathy and loving attitude towards all spiritual paths or religions, everyone who's trying to get to that same roof. and understand that even after getting there and coming back, they may interpret it differently, and they may, all according to the path that they took, the nature of the ladder and the nature of personality. Okay, so I'm done. So now